I thought that I would focus on a demonstration or a presentation about my way of rendering images in enamel. And I'm really casual, so if anyone has a question, like, feel free to just jump right in and ask. You don't have to raise your hand or anything. And I brought a lot of samples that are mostly at that end of the table. Anyone feel free to pick up anything. Just I ask that you hold it over the table, so that way it doesn't crack. It is still glass. So anyways, the processes that I'll show today will just talk about using a variety of mark making tools that work in enamel, but they also are often appropriate for ceramics and other glass applications. So I think what's exciting about this process and how it fits in with this symposium is that there's a lot of crossover and there's a lot of connections in terms of what I'm doing and what's happening in a lot of these other mediums. So also, what I'm showing works on a variety of scales. So it can work in miniature jewelry scale. It could also work on a large monumental scale. For metals is not monumental for what is for painting necessarily, but around 4 feet, 5 feet, all of this can expand and contract in terms of the information. So in terms of materials, I really like to work with copper. Enamel likes alloy. It does not like alloys. It likes a pure metal, mostly because as an alloy would heat up, it expands and contracts at different rates. And so the glass doesn't really like that. So I love copper because it's pure. And I also love what it does in terms of malleability. So if I get too techie, where some people who are not metalsmiths are like, what are you talking about? Please let me know and I can back up. But in terms of forms, I started off learning flat, and Gretchen taught it that way, which was a really nice way to learn and to be able to think about applying and not dive too much into smithing. But as I continued to work, I really realized that having something that has some dimensionality is nice because it can, on a structural level, give you integrity. You know, if something gets up and it fuses at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, a flat plane really likes to wave and move and do some interesting things. But if you want it to stay flat, that can be challenging. So in terms of preparation, I oftentimes will work on something that has some sort of slight dome, so I use die forming a lot. And I use die forming on a jewelry scale, but if you come to my lecture this afternoon, you'll also see that I also work on a really large scale as well. So I love having die forms or sinking or raising or something that's going to give me a little bit more control over my form. Another way that I like to work too in order to fire things well and easily is to work on something that has dimension like a copper canvas almost. So using bending brakes and other types of really quick metal fabrication methods to start to give a little bit of lift and not have to worry as much about being finicky about what's happening on the back. So that's pretty much how I think about my forms. If you want to stay flat, for those of you who are smiths, a really nice way to give your piece a little bit of extra structure is to just basically cut, basically like the way you'd make an envelope. So you would cut these little angled sides and then just fold them over. So that way it will start to reinforce that edge. I can pass that around because there's nothing on it. And that's going to give it a little bit more form in order to keep that together. So here's a larger version of that. And so I'm able to keep my piece a little bit more stable. So in terms of the work, I really use a lot of layering. So a lot of the process I can't show in an hour and a half. It's just not possible. But a lot of my pieces are developed in terms of image over many firings. So 30, 35, maybe 40 times going in and out of the kiln. And so for those of you who have never done enameling, it's kind of like instant gratification. So it fires for about a minute and a half. So you apply some glass, and then you fuse it 90 seconds, it's out, and then you're on to the next thing. And so a lot of this is developed really slowly, and enamel likes thin layers. So you want to add things a little bit at a time, so that way you're having, again, some good structural integrity. So this is a piece, and I'm going to kind of zoom past just the basics because of time, but this is a piece that I started, and it's basically just using a lot of stenciling in order to block out imagery. And I kind of think about printmaking a lot when I'm preparing my pieces, and taking serigraphy or screen printing was a really good way for me to think about developing images in enamel. So it's like another great crossover. Is anyone a printmaker that's in here? Yeah, so it's like printing a flat, you know? So I end up by putting base coats, and then I end up using stencils in order to basically block out really basic colors before I'm ready to start to develop my work. So I use really basic stencils. I'll take printouts. I do work digitally quite a bit in terms of my image prep, and so I'll use different models. I'll totally take something and appropriate it from online or newspapers, and then I'll scale it down to whatever I need, and then I'll end up just cutting it out with an X-Acto knife and using that as a really basic stencil. And because I don't reuse them a lot, I don't necessarily go through the extra labor of maybe drawing it on Illustrator and laser cutting. That's something that's more sustainable because I really don't need it. It's usually once or twice and then I chuck it and it's no big deal. So that's pretty much how I begin. And then when I was a student and I was really struggling in my beginning classes, I was like, Gretchen, I like the color, I like this glass, but I really just want to like make a mark. I just want to draw on this. So how do I do that? And so she started introducing me to graphite pencils. So you can draw directly into a ground with something, but the graphite pencil ends up kind of burning away after multiple firings, and it wasn't really doing what I wanted. So then she gave me one of these ceramic underglaze pencils, and it just changed my world for that moment. And it was wonderful because I was able to just directly draw, and it's very much like using a charcoal pencil. So in terms of the texture and the sort of width of the point. And it's nice because it can hold up to really like high temps and multiple firings. And so I use that as sort of the beginning of the blueprint of a lot of my drawings. And if you guys can't see the samples from where you are, I'm sorry, but you'll have to go see it afterwards. But in order to draw directly onto a ground, you have to give it some sort of tooth. So right now it's not going to take whatsoever. So I want to make sure that I give it some sort of matte surface, and there's lots of ways that you can do that. You can sand or bead blast the surface, but it can be kind of an aggressive texture sometimes, and then it just kind of depends what kind of ground you want. And so you could stone it, like grind it manually with a lum-dum stone or diamond pads, but who has time for that? I don't. Or you could do what Gretchen has over there, which is this etching cream. Maybe it would work best if I just apply it here. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay. I have a little butcher tray that I can just put this in, which is perfect. But the one thing I don't have is a paintbrush and some gloves. The two things that I don't have. Yeah. Wow, you have the good stuff, Gretchen. The velvet etching cream. I use Etchall. Yeah, I think it does the same thing. This one's really awesome. It's really like super toxic. Yes. Yeah.
Very toxic.
It's hydrofluoric acid. Yep. So but that's what I used. Yes. Okay. So you really don't want to get this on your skin. There's some really bad things. Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, I'll just put it on and I'll pass it back to you guys, and then you guys can put it somewhere else. So I kind of did this like a cooking demo. So I'm going to apply it on something, and then there's going to be something else that's ready to go. So in terms of materials, yeah, so this is good stuff. It's like the best in terms of giving you a good etch, but please use caution when you're using this material.
I'm going to ask Gretchen, where do you get that?
Right.
That's a good question.
I had to buy it on eBay last time. I bet you just bought it in bulk because it's really hard to get.
I did buy a small, I think I bought like 4 ounces of it off of Etsy.
Yeah.
It won't go very far.
So the other one that's more available is the Etchall brand, and it's all one word, and it's a slightly different chemical. It's ammonium bifluoride, and you can get it in a cream or in a liquid where you can just dip the whole thing. So I really like both for different reasons. Like the dip and etch is nice for sculptural form because you can get some nooks and crannies. But for this stuff, it's great, and I like it on a large scale because sometimes I'm working on panels that are like maybe 24 inches wide. That's more my like preferred scale for some of this larger painting work. And so I'd have to buy like 10 gallons of it to dip that whole thing in. So it's nice to be able to just apply it directly where I want it. And so for this particular piece, I'm really only going to be drawing on, this is like one of my flower forms. These are going to be legs that will be rendered, and then this is going to have some really developed floral imagery. So I really just need to etch in here. I don't have to do the whole thing unless I think some action is going to happen over there. So there's another brand that's called, I'm totally spacing. You can get it at Michael's. Does anyone want to? Armor Etch. Armor Etch is another brand that you can get locally, and you can just get it in these little like 2-ounce containers, and it's overpriced, but if you need it in a pinch or for jewelry scale, it's great. So yeah, normally under ventilation, but just for now, it'll be fine. So I put it on really thick, like imagine a peanut butter sandwich. This is a runny peanut butter sandwich, or I could think of other things that this reminds me of, but I'm not going to say it. Normally, when you get it, it's like a really light tan cream, like beige, and kind of thick, so you can water it down so that way it pools around. And so I just kind of glom it on there and make sure I go over my edges of whatever it is my line work is going to be, so that way you don't have like an oops or a break in it. And then I just let it sit there for 20 to 30 minutes. And in that time, I kind of, every few minutes as I think about it, I'll just kind of shmoo it around a little bit to make sure that there's no air bubbles. I make sure that there's no brush strokes, because it can etch that. And then you're like in the middle of a drawing, and there might be this spot where it's just glossy, and then you're sad. So you have to, sometimes I keep sandpaper, and I'll just kind of spot sand an area if it did that. When I was at UW-Madison, Lisa Grelnick says that she'll just sit there the whole time and just like brush it around, and that does work better.
Yeah, I do that.
You do that too.
I learned something from a workshop, from a student in a workshop one time.
Yeah?
What I do now too is after I'm done etching, I use a rubber spatula and put it back into the bottle, and it just keeps working and working. So
I do that too.
a little goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Totally. So when you're done, set your timer, go do something else, come back, squeegee it back with your spatula or whatever, and then it'll just keep getting darker and darker and darker, and eventually it is like another acid, like when you're doing metal etching, and it will be cached. And then I just, I keep it in my studio and then wait for my city to do their chemical collection, and I just pass it on, and that doesn't happen too often. So anyways, that's my next step in terms of preparing a ground. Yes?
So for smalls, can you just sand?
Yeah, you can. It is labor intensive, and then the nice thing about sanding is that if you had some texture from your firing, it will take that out and make a really nice ground, but you really have to go to a fine grit. So you have to progressively go from coarse to fine in order to not get the strokes in the drawing. Like it almost show like a grain. And I don't like it. I think it's the worst. Just because I hate sanding. I've always hated sanding. It's my least favorite activity in smithing. So it's what is right for your studio practice. On a small scale, maybe you have a little 1 inch, you could probably rock that pretty quickly. Yeah, so get a tooth however you want. You might read in some books that you can spray like Aquanet hairspray, and it will work a little bit to quickly matte a surface, but we tried it in a bunch of workshops, and it did do something, but for the type of rendering I want to do, I'm not satisfied. It doesn't quite give the nice tooth that I want. So that is a thing, though. Can I pass this back to somebody who wants to take the vat of acid? Thank you, ma'am. Okay. So yeah, I did. This was a weird demo piece that I did when I was at my last workshop, and so this background I hate, and I want to do something with, but it'll be fine for now. Let me take my gloves off. I'll put this over here too. So voila, you etch your piece, and the one thing to take note of is because that's a pretty caustic acid in terms of cleanup, just to backtrack for a second, after you squeegee that and you rinse it off really well, you want to scrub it really aggressively with like a mild Scotch-Brite pad or even a gloved finger, because it can leave a powdery acidy residue on the surface, and it's a barrier to your next process. Also make sure you neutralize in some baking soda before you go on to the next step, because there's been times where I didn't do that, and it'll leave that tiny residue that you can't see with your eye, and if your hand rubs across it, you can feel a burn, kind of like if you accidentally get pickle on you and you don't notice until a few minutes later, and it's that slow, nasty feeling. So neutralize, neutralize, neutralize. Okay, so yeah, so anyways, this is one where I was going to prepare to do a drawing, and this is on a really small scale, but I'm starting this new series of drawings of children with devices. And so these are my kids immersed in a Nintendo system. And I basically cut this out. I had made a stencil of it here. And then I will also then use this for my reference for when I'm drawing. So, and sometimes if it's a more complex drawing, then I'll make sure that this is scaled, and I might do a few preparatory sketches in advance. Just depends. The smaller you go with this process, the harder it is. So it seems counterintuitive. You would think that you would just want to go with like something really like quick and non-committal, but it's really difficult to get detail into a small jewelry scale with a big like stumpy pencil. And so I learned on this process in like big 12-inch pieces of copper, and I was really able to stretch out my arm and get comfortable with the material. And it's really been over like, you know, over a decade of like kind of getting smaller and smaller to see how low can I go in terms of control. So if you're just trying it out, go big, even though I know copper's getting expensive. When I was a student, that was less of an issue. So anyways, then you just draw. And so the underglaze pencil, I didn't bring my whole set of them, but these are made by Amico. So you can get them from any ceramic supplier, and they come in a variety of really basic hues. So it's an underglaze. It's meant to go under the glass or the glaze. There's no frit in these whatsoever. So it's basically like a powdered oxide. And that's really important to note because like when I give my workshops, and we're doing this over maybe the course of 3 days or a week, we kind of talk about like layering and how to think about this process from, oh, this is a good way to describe it. So go think about it, if you're a metalsmith, like soldering. So just like you have hard solder, and then you go to medium solder and easy and maybe extra easy, then you want to think about glass in the same way. So you want to make sure that you're staging and layering. So you start with the hardest, high-firing material, and then you're going progressively to softer glass. And that way you're going to get a lot of control in your mark making. So if you start with something that's really soft, and then you put something that's really hard, high-firing on top, all that business underneath is going to fire first, and it's going to shoot through and kind of blur out your images. So when students are beginning and they're like, what happened? That's usually, it's my student voice. Sorry, guys. That's usually because they're not understanding the melting temperature of the materials that they're working with. Can I ask you, Margaret, can you pass me, no, there's like a workbook on the tablecloth. Sorry, I wasn't specific. This is actually really helpful. I got this from, so I use Thompson enamel because it's the American supplier that's lead-free, which I like to use. And I kind of resisted using this, but for students for learning, it's really great because it gives you every glass, because they don't give it in the catalog, you have to actually buy it, which is pretty stingy in my opinion. But it gives you every color that they supply and what its flow point is and what its melting temperature is. And so if you're ever not sure, just look it up, look in a book, and it will tell you what you need to know so you can have control over your medium.
And you can get that from Thompson.
Yeah, you can order it. Yeah, it's totally worth it. I just went to Thompson Enamel, and I taught a workshop there at that Carpenter nonprofit, and it's great because you got to get a tour of the factory. And oh my God, it's interesting. And like nobody wears a dust mask. There's like no ventilation. People are just like scooping up like powdered oxides and raw minerals, and it's like really amazing. And but you were able to see them frit the glass and tumble it and break it up into smaller pieces. It's well worth a trip to Bellevue, Kentucky. It was totally awesome. And then they have a store right there, of course, so that you can buy everything up. So for teaching a workshop, it was nice because I could demo something and then they just go buy it. It was great. So shameless plug. I'm going to be teaching a workshop there next summer if anyone's interested in a longer experience. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, so anyways, that was a really big tangent. Underglaze pencils. So they have a bunch of colors. And I primarily use black because it's the most consistent and stable. It will stay black. It's not going to change. There are other colors, and there's probably there's a couple samples of color tests that are right in front of Kathy if people are interested in seeing them. But there's like a yellow and a green and a violet, and experiment. But just know, like other materials, glass and ceramics, a lot of the warmer hues are really soft and they tend to burn out really quickly. So usually blacks and blues are my groove. And I'm really just using this to begin the process and get basically a value layout for the work that I want to make. So can I have a paper towel? That's one thing that I didn't get. Thank you, Robot Matthew. Okay, this has been around the bend for a while, and it's been touched and lots of I don't know what funk is on there, so this is the thing to do. Spit on it. Thank you, Gretchen. One time, I totally spit on this lady. I was teaching an art class in Mesa, Arizona, and she was like right up in my business, kind of like wanting to see, and I hadn't honed my spit technique yet. And it instead of like a dart, it did a spray, and it went all over her arm. It's what happens. I don't know. Sorry.
Can you explain why you do that?
Oh, it just degreases your surface. So Gretchen taught me that. Didn't you? Don't you do that? Gretchen didn't. Sorry to put you on the spot. Spit. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So you can use it on your bare copper if you're just going to get your first layer on. When in doubt, and just spit. Like in my other studio, I didn't have a sink close by, and if I was lazy, I would just do it. Rub it around, and then you can move on with your process. And the more coffee and tea you drink, the better it is, because your saliva is more acidic. So that works for me. And it's great, too, because if you like oxidation, which I really enjoy as a way to build up a background, I don't want to scrub it with something too abrasive, and so I can degrease without losing like the sexy fire scale patterns that are so lovely. So spit. And I do it at school, too, and that guarantees that the students don't steal my shop cloths. They're mine, and they have no desire to touch them. Yeah. So body fluids, they serve many purposes.
I learned that from Kenneth Bates. He spit on enamels. He taught us to spit on enamels. He did a workshop where he was spitting on the enamel, and one of the women said, "Can you buy it in a jar?"
Gross. Wow, that's really good to know that the tradition spans generations of fluid.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, and from here on out, it's just like draw whatever you want to draw on whatever is matted down. And so the tools that I like to use besides the pencil is, tortillons, blending stumps. I have a bunch of different scales of that. If I want a softer blend, I use a lot of Q-tips. And then on a really small scale, when I'm doing minis, a toothpick or a sharpened dowel rod is like just a nice way to kind of move the material around. And so it's not like working on paper, though, because it's a different kind of tooth and it doesn't absorb in the same way. So it's on there really superficially until you fire it down. So it's going to be different. Like imagine drawing on a beach stone, a really smooth beach stone. That's what it's kind of like. So that's different because a lot of students that take my workshops, they like expect it to react like other surfaces, and then they're really frustrated in the beginning. So you'll have to adjust your drawing practice a little bit. So in terms of getting the best point, I just sharpen mine on a belt sander, and it's really great because I can get a nice point and I don't like using the blade, but I will if I have to. Then you have to use the sandpaper, and that takes time. And then I avoid any rotary pencil sharpeners because it can sometimes crack the barrel of it, just like Prismacolors, and then you're sad because this is stupidly expensive. It's like, I don't know, $15 for one pencil. If you want to get a set of all the colors, it's like $80. But the good news is that it will last a really long time. So I would just maybe start with one. Do you sell them in the store here, Gretchen?
We have had them, but I don't know that we have them right now.
Okay, noted.
And we might have bought it from a ceramic supply. Where do you get them from?
I buy it from bigceramicstore.com.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you just put in Amico underglaze pencils, I'm sure there's a lot of places that you can get it from. And you can buy it a la carte, like just one color or the set. And one thing I did notice is that they do have different cone options online, which is good to note. Like there's some that are cone 8, some are cone 6. It doesn't matter for what we're doing, so you can get either and they're going to work. So anyways, I have to draw this now. And I don't think that I'm actually going to get, like, the workshop would be over and then you guys will be at dinner and I'd still be drawing this. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just draw a little bit just to kind of show you how to put down the material, and then I guess I can finish it later, but in general, when you're doing this process, you want to get it all in while your surface is etched. I should have started this before. But it's a couple of things I guess I could tell you while I'm doing this is that, what can I tell you? It's kind of unforgiving that it stains because the glass it is porous though, you know, even though it's not as textured as paper, it has little air bubble pores, and so the underglaze will kind of get soaked into that. So if you like put a really stately mark and then you try and erase it out, it will leave a little stain. So sometimes when I'm starting off, if I have a little residue on my tortillon, I'll just sketch it out with that, and that will come off a lot easier, you know, because I think that's the hardest part when I'm teaching workshops is I just go for it and I start drawing. A lot of students want to have a way to transfer, and I don't know. Do you have any students?
People used to use
Carbon paper.
Draw on the back, transfer that.
Yeah. Yeah. That works.
You mean from a photograph?
Right. Yeah. If you wanted to work from a found image. If you're not working from a found image, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I try not to mix the graphite and the underglaze because they end up kind of firing really differently. And some students really love the graphite, and I show them this process that you can, at this moment, you could do graphite pencil or underglaze, and they would both work. And if you're just doing 1 or 2 firings with a pencil, then and you like the graphite look, then it's great. So go forth and do that. But I try not to put them all together. Like I try not to sketch in graphite and then go over this because the graphite is that metallic slick surface, so it's kind of like a resist where I'm trying to put down the underglaze, and that's problematic. So, okay, this is really hard to draw with like 50 people watching me. But I don't know. That's a good idea. I've never tried that. It's fairly. I think it wouldn't do what you want it to do. You know, like I don't think it's a resist in that particular way, but because the enamel will just go on top of it and fire. But it's mostly just a resist for this, and then you'll just get like light gray and dark gray, and that could be neat, but maybe not what you're asking.
So after your entire surface has been etched, you just start drawing like the whole thing, or do you do it in parts?
So do it all, because that's a really good question. The next step at this point is to then fire this, to fuse it into the background, and then you're glossy again. And then you're going to try and make a mark, and then you're going to be sad because you can't do it. Are you the one who asked? It was you. Okay. Yeah. You won't be able to draw anymore. And then if you want to draw more, you have to re-etch it.
Okay.
And then if you re-etched it, you're going to etch away the drawing that you just did. So just do it all now. And if you make a mistake or you go back and you're like, oh, wait, but I really, 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 really wanted to add this part over there, and I didn't, you can put layers of like a medium or soft clear, fire that onto it, and then etch the clear, and then your drawing is protected. Does that make sense? That stopped. Yeah, and that was the really nice thing about being in Cleveland, was because of its industrial past and present, in whatever form that is, there was just a lot of resources that are special to our field that since I've moved away and been in lots of other cities that I don't have access to. So we did Faro, and then there was also a standard sign company. Do you know if they're still in business? I think so. Oh, so if anyone's local and they're interested, they're fascinating because they do, they reproduce antique signs in enamel on steel, and so they apply it differently. It's the enamel suspended in squeegee oil or pine oil, and they're doing the old school screen printing methods. So like old antique Coke signs and that kind of thing is their groove. And they hang it on meat hooks, and so it's a vertical, what's that? Yeah, I also worked with them, and so I think that was just nice. Like everyone was really, I found that a lot of industries are interested in artists. They think that we're just like unicorns, and they are curious about our lives and what we do. And so it's a really nice exchange to just work with them in a less organized fashion. So you don't really have to wait for someone to set up an internship. Just go there and say, hi, I really want to do this thing. Can I try it? Can you help me? And most often than not, they're into it on some level, and they all will set up their own parameters. And yeah, just do it, and it's great. I remember when I was in Wisconsin, when I first got there, I found a laser cutting company because I wanted to enamel on big laser cut steel. And so I called at least 50 places around Milwaukee and what have you. And no, there were a lot that didn't want to work with me because they were looking for big orders, and they want to get at least a 500 of something cut, not like 3. And finally, the last person on my list, who was the closest, the owner answered the phone. It was a really small company, and I said what I want to do for my project, and he's like, yeah, we can do that. I was like, what? Okay, cool. And he was so nice. Like I sent him my files, and he cut them for free. He cut all of this work, and he gave me more than I wanted. And he was just so nice and so kind. And it was the largest laser cutting bed in Wisconsin at the time. And so you could work really big. And I realized later it's kind of like drugs. Like the first one was for free. And then I had to start to pony up. But then it was okay. And the prices are semi-reasonable if you have a little bit of a budget for that. So anyways, that's the great thing about Cleveland, and one thing that I miss. I'm outside of Indianapolis now, and it's, Indianapolis is a bigger city, but it doesn't have that same industrial history, and so I have to travel further and hunt longer to get my stuff done. Yeah. I saw that. Yeah, I heard about it. Shut up! That's awesome. You guys are so lucky. That's awesome. That's really great. Can I come by sometime? And yeah, okay.
I'm going to add that there's also a water jet going into the Fab Lab over in LC3.
That's so great. You guys are so lucky. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's some really great collaboration. Yeah, for me, I just farm it out, and I just send. Right now, I'll send copper to some place. I'll mail it to them and the file, and then they'll mail it back to me, and it works. But for students, that's always the stress point because I want to push them to, try that because when you're out of school and you don't have access to all this amazing equipment, you better figure out how to make your work another way. And so I say just try getting something cut, and then they get the estimate back, and then they're like, I'll just cut it out. Okay, so I'll stop here just because it's going to take me a while, and I don't know if you can even see that, but I'm just starting to sketch out some really basic figure elements on it. I guess I could just pass this around. It's not the best, but just something so you can get an idea. And at this point, once you get the entire thing rendered, then you want to fire it really gingerly and carefully just to lock it down. Gretchen, is she still here?
Yeah.
I forgot to bring an enamel. Do you have any soft clear of any sort that I can use? Okay, thanks. Okay,
So how do you make the decision?
2007. Yeah, what's that?
How do you were making decisions between the graphite and
Mhm.
then using the enamel pencil, right?
Yeah,
How do you make those decisions?
I use one or the other. So if I'm doing graphite pencil, I will use it if I'm only going to fire one or two more times, and then I'm done. And then if I want to build up something that has more full color range or start to develop a little bit more information, then I'll use the underglaze pencils.
So you never use like a little of each.
I don't. It's a personal preference.
Have you ever used like graph? Because you said like the last couple of firings. Would you ever use that to go in and do some more detail work on top of underglaze?
No.
No.
I don't, just because you have to etch it again, and then there's
Makes
that
sense.
thing. But then that goes into the solder analogy. I'll use other materials then that I can apply without needing the etch. That's going to help develop the work a little bit further. Yeah.
You did touch on doing
Thank you.
porcelain and steel.
Yeah.
Are you going to talk more about that or no?
I could. Kathy, you're closest. Do you see the ones that are white porcelain and steel squares right in front of you? There's a bunch of them. I can pass those around because they're least likely to break.
Yes.
That one's different, yeah.
You want me to pass them around?
Sure, that would be fine. Yeah, porcelain and steel is an awesome material, and Gretchen introduced that to me, and that works beautifully for everything that I'm showing you so far. And, well, a lot of these are too. Yeah, I guess I can show this one too. So this has a little graphite pencil and then some tests for China paints, which is what we'll talk about next. And it's really nice because it's really cheap. It's actually just dry erase marker board, so it's wonderful. You can, I'm not suggesting maybe that you buy that and tear it apart, but you can find these online through Thompson Enamel and some other sources. It's really thin. It's 28 gauge, so it doesn't like a lot of heavy sifted layers of enamel, but if you're just sticking with underglazes and China paints or overglazes, then it's a really lovely substrate. It's great for jewelry scale too because it's so light. It can form it, but you just have to know that it's going to splinter and do some maybe interesting things, that it's not going to be virginal and like perfect once you shape it. The enamel just cracks a little bit, but you can refire it. So I love it. I used to do a lot of that when I was here at school, yeah, and I just got into another track with doing more dimensional forming. Yeah, but all of that works really nicely. Yeah. There was something else I was going to say. It was,
Sorry if I
You
no.
buy the porcelain enamels through Thompson?
You can buy it through Thompson, yeah.
They come in little jars?
The porcelain and steel?
Yes, the enamel,
Oh, the enamel itself.
yeah.
The porcelain enamel. You can buy it from Thompson. You can get it powdered or already pre-mixed, and it's okay. The Faro enamel was really superior. It was a slightly different mix, and we're sad that we can't get that as much. You actually can buy it in like 50 pound drums from China, but I don't suggest that as a starting point. Thompson is good. Yeah. Yeah. I did buy that with a guy. I'll talk about it in my lecture a little bit later. Sorry, I'm trying to think about what I was going to say, and I totally forgot. Did you guys say they're sifting? Yeah, I can use this. This is what I was going to say. Instead of the underglaze pencils, if you like to work wet, but you want to do the same material and kind of get a really interesting drawing, then you can get powdered oxides. So it's the same material as the pencils. It's just in a powder form with the same spectrum of colors. So you can take this and you can mix it with water or even lavender oil or something, and so you can just paint the same way that I just showed the drawing. So that's really nice. And so you can use these, kind of think of them like mason stains if anyone's a ceramicist here. So you can use that material as an oxide. So it's the same stuff. It's just this is compressed into a pencil, and this is free form. Oh, before I forget, I did email Gretchen some handouts that are in that far back corner on Stephen's sample desk. So there's one that details all of these materials that I'm talking about for today. So if anyone's interested, grab one of those. And then there's another one that's about firing ceramic decals, which we hopefully will get to. I don't know. So anyway, so you did a drawing, and then you got to lock it down. So we're going to fire it. And I actually like to put a little bit of a clear coat on it right now. So that way, if there's any thickness in the underglaze pencil application, it's just going to gloss everything over. Does anyone know where my piece is? It's somewhere. OK, take your time. That's all right.
So is Farrah still in business then?
Yeah, but I think they've really redirected their focus to, no, just like products that are not for enamel, like ceramics and glass maybe.
And then what was the name of the sign company?
Standard Sign. I don't remember what street that's on, but it's halfway between here and downtown.
Oh.
It's really close. And it's like a really small family-owned business. So anyways, I'm going to lock down my drawing, and so I'm going to do a really, really light dusting of a soft clear. So just, there's a couple kinds. This one happens to be the number 2007 if you're interested in the details. And it's like meant to be very thin so you can still see your drawing underneath it. Think about like sugar, a coating of sugar on a snickerdoodle cookie or something. Like you still see the texture underneath it. It's just this little soft dusting, and it's enough to just lock down that powder. You can fire it without the clear. I just like to skip a step because oftentimes wherever it's really thick, it's not going to like sink in and gloss over. Any questions about anything? Okay, wear a dust mask when you sift. Super fine powder. You guys will be fine, just one time. After 20 years, it's a thing. So, and you guys can't see this, but anyways, you can still see the drawing. It's so thin. It's just the tiniest bit. And I like to use really fine mesh sieves for my applications, so that way I keep a really smooth texture. So 180 is usually my groove for all of the processes. Okay. So.
Oh, trivets.
So the nice thing about firing on this kind of form is that I don't have to use any weird trivets to suspend anything. Just put it on the screen, and then you're good to go. OK, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it does fit. And then I'll use this one because it's a little bit hotter. So yeah, I just set my kiln to 1500 degrees. I don't do anything super special. At this point, the powdered underglaze would be, if you're thinking about solder analogies, like somewhere between hard and medium, you know, so you're still good. You can mess this step up if you aren't paying attention to your timing, but because you have a hard fired enamel and you want to gloss over that hard, so you still have to be kind of in like a fired to maturity state. You're not getting into any like low fire or less time yet, if that makes sense. I like your orange clock. It's nice. And I kind of saw when I put that in. Yeah. How long have I been teaching? God, honestly, in some capacity, teaching right since I left CIA. I think Gretchen was kind, and she let me teach that night class. And that was my first foray into instruction, and I liked it enough to keep going. And on a tenure track since 2008. But I did the adjunct hustle for a while, so it's hard. Oh. It's okay. So I'm not going to press this or anything because I might squash it. Yes, okay. You guys have so many irons, that's awesome. Okay, so I'll just let that cool, and then I'll pass this around actually when it's reasonable so you can see what that looks like. But yeah, after I went to grad school in Arizona State, which doesn't have a smithing program anymore. They folded it with sculpture. I'm a little bit bitter about that. But yeah, after that, I taught adjunct for a number of years. And I at a certain point, my husband told me that I had 15 sources of income on my tax return. So I was like, really? Like I was teaching at like 4 different community colleges and like 3 different art centers, and then working at a gallery and just scraping by with whatever I could get. And it was really tough. I drove, if you've been to Phoenix, you know, it's a big sprawl. So I was in my car all the time. And I learned a lot, though, during those times, you know. And it was nice because I was able to make a lot of mistakes and learn how to, like, hone my pedagogy and what worked for me in terms of presenting by being at all these different types of institutions. So I wouldn't change anything, although it was a struggle. Okay, yeah, that's pretty hot. Okay, I'm cooking in someone else's kitchen. So I will let that cool. I do have a version of this that's already fired. That's right in front of Margaret. I'm sorry to put you on the spot again. There's like a pink oval right next one over. Right there. Yes. Ding. Yeah, so that's, if you want to pass that around, but just don't drop it. I'm not married to that one. But it's the same drawing that I just started. Okay, so at this point, because this is still the same melting temperature as some of the base coats that I've used, if I want to go back in and change anything in terms, or add sifted enamel in any way, if I wanted to tint the whole drawing another hue, add details, this would be my time to do it. And so I work kind of in tandem between the underglazes and then the sifted enamel. And I use a method to apply the enamel that Gretchen hates. I don't know if she's still here.
Hey, I am.
And I use squeegee oil, which I mentioned before, and it's like really stinky. It's pretty not great for you to breathe in. So when I'm in my home studio, I started using ventilation for the applying and the firing. And it's nice because you can paint a really hard edges with it and really bring out some more color. And I love color, so that is important to me. So anyways, you can get squeegee oil from Thompson.
It's A-OK.
Is it? Okay.
It's okay.
Okay. So I think the squeegee term comes from the history of printmaking that I was talking about, because that was when printmaking was oil-based, they would use this pine oil, and they would mix their pigments with it and squeegee it through the screens. And then I think the enamel community appropriated that for our process. And I don't screen print with it, but it just, I'll show you. I basically use a variety of different like wet things to make the enamel stick. So I call it glitter glue painting, like when you were a kid and you put Elmer's glue down and then you sift glitter on it and then you make a Christmas card. It's the same thing, and so you can use a lot of different things. I just like this because it spreads beautifully and then it leaves really nice hard edges. So if you're an enamelist, like Clearfire is really, because it's water-based, it leaves like a mottled surface and it just sucks. So use this, or if you're doing small marks, anything that's a water-based marker, like a highlighter or even a micron pen. My students love the micron pen because you can make these beautiful line drawings and then sift a color on it and like, voila, it's like perfect. So it just has to be not permanent, so not a Sharpie or something like that. So I use squeegee oil. And Gretchen, do you have it here? I have my own, but Gretchen has it. Yeah. And it's just, it looks like a clear, slightly yellowy oil when you get it. I tint it with India ink. So I put a few drops of just regular India ink, and it just makes it so I can see where I'm painting. So I can see where my mark is. I know when I have a mistake, and then the India ink will burn out. And just like any of the markers, like highlighters and what have you, that color does not stay. It's too low fire. So that's what I'll do here. All right, I'm going to put that flux back. That didn't work at all. Just put it beneath me. Okay, I can take that off. Okay, so I hate this background. It's not working for me. And so I'm just I'm gonna block out the whole thing with this other color, and we'll see how that goes. And I totally forgot to bring my big paintbrush, which was, you know what? I think I have to use like a nice sable-y one. So I'll just use a medium one. It'll just take me a little bit longer. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Thank you. Yeah, for this part, it's really good to use like a high quality paintbrush. Yeah. So I'll just use this. Maybe I'll just do a section just for the sake of time. Because the oil, it's kind of caustic too, and if you have like a synthetic or a cheaper brush, it seems to like just help take those bristles out really fast. So then you're painting, you'll get the bristles in your enamel, and then it's just frustrating. So I'll use this. Again, I usually do this in ventilation. It's a little stinky. One time I was doing a really big panel, and I needed to get the whole background in another color, and I got really high off of this in a really not fun way. It was bad, so just protect yourself. Oh, thank you. Yeah, okay. This is a nice one. This is squeegee oil. Gretchen has some here, and you can get it at Thompson. If you hate this, because I know a lot of people are sensitive to fumes, and I think as I'm getting older, I'm also becoming like that. You can use essential oils, like lavender oil is good. Some of my students were experimenting with different kinds, so like tea tree oil seemed to also, I mean, I don't know, they all seem to work. The only difference is that they're really runny. And this is the perfect viscosity. It's perfect. Everything that's so bad is so good. It does. It smells like pine salt, and it just, after a while, it just gets to you.
So how do you use this to block out the colors?
So I'm going to paint this wherever I want this like turquoise to go, and then I'm going to just sift over it and then tap it off, and it's just going to stick where I'm painting it. And then the oil burns off in the kiln. It's nice. It can catch on fire in the kiln, so that's a thing to be aware of. And so you usually want to let it dry a little bit before you put it in. So again, this will work dimensionally or flat. All of this has the potential to be a sculptural application. Just want to put that out there. It's harder, but it can be done. And you guys have this amazing equipment in all these kilns of different sizes.
You notice we waited until you graduated before we got this 10 beautiful kilns.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everything good happens after I leave. Everywhere I go in life, I swear to God. Like, beautiful building. I feel like I missed the boat on everything. It's so not fair.
Started construction on this new building and tore down the gun building after I did.
See? All right.
I sympathize.
I'm not alone. Yeah. Totally. Okay, I'm sorry. This takes a little bit of time. Another thing I do lately is I mix half lavender and half squeegee just to cut down on the fumes, and that is working okay. So you can play with that. I tried other oils like vegetable oil and olive oil, and it doesn't work. It'll make a really cool pattern, like it'll get beat up, so you can play with that. But if you want it to be like a really nice even ground, then it's not your groove.
You said vegetable oil?
Yeah, just like cooking oils,
Olive oil.
sunflower oil, soybean oils, whatever, yeah.
So does that have anything to do with like just them being totally different oils? Or
Yes.
one of them being dirtier than the other or something like that maybe?
You know, maybe. I didn't dig too deep,
It might be
but
something
I
to
imagine
explore.
so. It would be something, yeah.
If it works and it causes cool patterns, it might be worth exploring.
Totally.
Like you said, if that's not your jam.
Yeah, but it really, they were cool.
Then. I'd like to see examples of that.
Yeah, I have it in the book. I can, if Gretchen has the art of enameling, there's a picture of a piece that I did that has it
Okay, cool.
later. We can do that later.
I'll make a note so I don't forget.
Yeah. Okay, so also after you paint it on, especially if this is like a big ground, sometimes if you just let it relax for a minute, and if there's brush strokes, they'll kind of level out. Also for painters or enamelists, keep your brushes separate. So have some that are for oil and some that are water-based. And they really shouldn't overlap. So just put it on, pile it on. Hopefully I didn't miss a spot. Sometimes I do, even with the India ink. So I put it on thicker than I need, and then I just try and make it soak in. And then I just tap it off. And sometimes I have to do a little damage control. Looks like I kind of got some in Sammy's hair. And so you can, if you are going to dry brush or like correct, make sure you're still wearing a mask or under a hood, because fine powder going back into your face is bad news. So it's a little finicky. It's not for everybody. Because it's just a little, it's a fine layer that's sticking on here, different from when you're dry sifting. You can get a really thick application. This kind of goes on like a wash. It's not, even though this is an opaque color, it's going to go on in a semi-transparent. And if I wanted to build up true opacity, then I'd have to just repeat this step 1 or 2 times until I get what I like. So that, you just want to wait a minute or so to let that oil dry out a little bit, and that's when it can catch on fire if you don't. And I used to do that all the time, and I think that's what Gretchen didn't like. I don't know. I remember a conversation. I've held that for like a long time, but if it catches on fire, I see the wisdom in it, because then the soot can fall on the elements, and those can break a lot faster. So it's really not good for your kiln. But it's true disclosure. If I'm working in my own studio, I just put it in and let her rip. And I know, and I just it all burns out. Even if it catches on fire, your image isn't affected at all. It's just really scary. And students sometimes will open the door and it's on fire, and you're like, close the door, and it'll just snuff itself out. So that is glitter glue painting. And you can do that as many times as you want. So that's kind of when I was saying these might be fired 30 times, 40 times. It's those steps like that that I'm just kind of starting to develop an image through lots of repeated firing. So it does take a while. I'm going to just put this back in here. Maybe we should turn the ventilation on if I'm going to fire this piece. How do we turn that on? Okay, so let's fire this, and then we'll see what we get, and then we can keep going, and we can talk about China paints. Thank you. Okay. It's hard for me to see. It's got a glare on it, but that's perfect. Okay, so I'll wait about 1.5 minutes, 1:15, and then we'll take that out. It's a little bit loud, so just talk amongst yourselves for a little bit, and we'll get this fired. Okay, this is still kind of warm, but this is not the most earth-shattering change, but put a layer of blue, and it's just kind of starting to dull and like calm the storm of this background, and I would probably continue to develop that a little bit more before going on. But continuing with the soldering analogy, so thinking about hard, medium, and then easy or soft, at this point, if I was done with all of that business, then, and I wanted to still develop maybe like more soft painterly details, more gradations that maybe sifted enamel doesn't lend itself to, where I want to just directly paint and start to bring out a little bit more depth in the image, then I use China paints. And so China paints, again, is something that crosses over lots of craft mediums, glass, ceramics, and enamel. And it's the same stuff, essentially, but there are a whole host of manufacturers and brands that you can get. And I think that when I work with students, that's when they're like, I'm so confused. What are all these products? And I don't understand how to navigate it. And so the difference between the underglazes that we just used, that were just pencils or in a powder, no glass. So just the oxide or the colorant. China paints, which come in a couple different forms, but often you maybe have seen them in glass vials. They kind of look like colored crack or something. It has glass in it. That's the big difference. And it's a really soft, easy glass. So it's lower fire. What's that?
It almost looks like pastel.
Yeah, it's just a really fine powder, and it is something that you can overfire. At this point, that's when I usually turn my kiln down to a lower temperature, and that's when you get into a little bit more care in terms of your firing. So these are great because you can program them to a setting, and so anywhere between like 1430 and 1450 is good for me to be able to have control of that material. So anyways, I don't use it a ton. A lot of people think that all of my images are China painted. I barely use it. It might just be like, it's that flick of the wrist. It's that like final little like darkening of a line or something to just bring it out. But I use it very sparingly. I mostly just use black again because I really enjoy working on a grayscale. And so I just mix it up on a butcher tray, and then I put it in contact lens cases because I have a lot of them now.
Mix it with what?
I didn't say yet, but yeah, so in that handout, there's a couple of different materials that I list. So you can be super, super simple with this, and you can just mix it with water if you like something that's going to dry really quickly. So I kind of talk about in my workshops, if you want something that stays wet and open, go for something oily. If you want something that's quick and acts like a watercolor, then just mix it with water. But there's a whole host of possible mixers and binders. Could somebody pass me that China Paint and Overglaze book? This was something that I got years ago and was a really great resource for me in terms of thinking about painting mediums. And it's meant specifically for China painters, so none of the firing stuff will relate if you're an enamelist. But Paul Lewing is, I think he's one of those guys who's on the workshop circuit. I'm not as into the ceramics world, but he has great technical information. And so the one binder that I use quite a bit and I love is I use glycerin suppository laxatives. And that's what I got from him. I mean, it was worth the price of the book. And so it's perfect because it comes in a little squeezy container. And so it's really portable. And you just have to wipe off the lube that's on the top. That's the big thing because they put a little bit of like Vaseline in there. But the glycerin is really nice. It's like the perfect in-between from a water and an oil. It stays wet for what seems like an eternity, and it's water-based. And if you can stick it inside of you, it's pretty non-toxic. So I like all of that. So I'm going to squeeze out something that might have some yuckies on it. And when you are mixing, do wear a dust mask. It's such a small amount that it seems so benign. But for me, over the years, I get a little worried. So anytime you're adding water to powder, something that's a fine particulate, protect your lungs. So I mix it up on a butcher tray. This seems like ridiculously huge for the amount that I'm doing, but you can mix up a bunch of colors and then just store them in whatever nice container you have, and then you can keep it and it'll be ready for later. So in terms of the brands, which I guess I didn't really talk about, I'm using Rin China paint for the demo. And that's one brand that I think they went out of business. But you can still buy it online if you Google it from other suppliers. These are leaded, so keep in mind that in your studio practice, decide if that's something that you want or don't want. I didn't list different manufacturers on my handout, but I can talk about them really quickly. So that's wetted down, so I can take it off. Thompson Enamel does a series of overglazes that are lead-free. So that's the primary one if you don't want to work with lead, and that's the most accessible, but unfortunately they kind of suck. So it's the range of colors is really limited, and they don't go down as nicely. I don't know how else to explain it, but they're just not milled as nicely. I don't think the prep and the care is taken. And they take all sorts of forms in the catalog. So just to check out, like there's acrylic enamels, and there's overglazed painting enamels, and there's watercolor enamels, and they're all just the same thing. So they just frit all of that, and they mill it down, and then they mix whatever binder they want with it to market it to people. So if you just buy the powdered version, you can choose your own adventure and do what you want in terms of your application. So that's what I do. So I have a whole host of different overglaze brands that people have given to me or I've bought. Another one was nice is Faro Sunshine Colors, and I think those are the best. It's my favorite, and you can buy a set of those for maybe $100 plus in these small little containers. And I think those are leaded too. Yeah, those are leaded too, but they're so good. Everything that's so bad is so good. And they also did, have you tried these? They're the Samba line. So Faro also did a Samba.
Yeah, I think we did get them sometime.
And these are lead-free. And so I'm still trying these out and seeing how they act. So yeah, if you want to pass that around and see.
You said these are unleaded?
Those are unleaded, lead-free, however you want to say it. Yeah. So I still use the leaded China paints, but I don't know how I justify it in that I try and be really careful with my firings, and I only use a baby bit, but I really like the results quite a bit. So anyways, you just mix it up with whatever binder. Mix it more than you think you need to because you just want it to get all the lumps out. And then scoop it into whatever container you want. And they can mix nicely together. There are certain hues that don't seem to do as well, and so I would just say experiment, but you could have a whole palette and then sort of freely paint. And I think the main takeaway with this material is that you really want it to go down thin, and instead of trying to build up an impasto painting approach, like if you were working on a canvas or a paper, is more like put down a layer of something, lock it down by firing it, put down another layer of something, and lock it down. It doesn't take well to say put down a layer of green and then put down a layer of another without firing that in between. It just, because it's still ground glass, it just wants to wipe itself away. And so that's the hardest part when I'm teaching this, is to get people to use the kiln as a break in order to make permanent the mark that you made before adding another one. So that's what it is. And so at that point, you just paint and use some baby brushes. And I'm sorry, this piece I'm not fully committed to it because I'm rushing. But the way that I normally use this is that with the underglaze pencil, if you saw when I passed some of these around, like they can still fire a little bit grainy or not get a true darkest value of whatever hue. And the China paints is a way to get that. It doesn't like, you can try and get highlights, but it doesn't like to do that. So I try to think about China paints the way I work in watercolor or gouache, where you try and use the white of the paper or the ground as your highlight instead of trying to build up brighter. And so that's a harder thing to wrap your brain around, I think, when you're just getting to know the medium. And you can do there's some other fun tricks in order to build up layers that, like little studio trick that, do you know about jelly roll pens?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can fire jelly roll pens and they fire like a China paint. I don't know. It's the jelly roll with the G-E-L-L-Y. And so there's white, so you can do like a highlight with them. And the only problem is I found that it might be more like an underglaze actually, because it's just the colorant, right?
Oxide.
Yeah, it's an
like
oxide.
medium oxide.
So you have to get it to a higher temperature. So you have to keep that in mind, that if you try and fire a white, you might undo some of your China paint. And the gold and the silver, I think, are the other ones.
Will do that too. It's
Yeah.
represent 'em.
Yeah, so it's whatever pigment is in there. And so a lot of your art materials, I know we're done, but just to check out real quick, like there's a glass on metal issue from way back by Bill Hellwig where he tests all these just regular art box materials like Prismacolors, like pastels. And again, there are certain oxides that will hold up to higher temperatures, like the greens, the blues, some of the violets. So you can experiment with some of that and not have to invest in really expensive materials and get some really direct drawing effects from them. So that's basically it. And so I'm done. My time is up, but here I'm just starting to pull out some like darker values in my drawing, like the Nintendo's going to get darker, and I'll fire that at 1450. And I go by more watching in the kiln at this point than time, and so I will just kind of peek wearing some kiln glasses, and I'm just looking for that surface to gloss over. But yeah, so that's kind of my process, a Cliff Notes version. And these samples will be out for the symposium, right?
Yeah, we were going to leave the samples out because
Yeah.
we knew it would be crowded. So please just don't
Yeah.
take them away from the table. Leave them on the table.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to talk shop, please, I'll be here through Saturday afternoon. And if you want to ask any questions at all, I'm available. So thank you so much for coming. I'm really honored.